Hey everyone, Reaper here again. I told you I'd be back wearing the same stuff. Yeah, I just made that other video a response to Wilkin did. Should I get a book slab? So here I am going to continue with my comic history video. The title of this video is My Comic History Year 1, 1993. That was the year I started collecting comics. So I basically wanted to talk about some of my experiences that year. And I'll show some of the books that I got that year that are still in my collection. Some of them have been upgraded over the years because they were lower grade, but I'll talk about that. It's just an interesting subject for me, and it's something that I'm really interested in watching in other people's videos. I know Dr. Von Chilla did this extensively, he talked about certain years when he got some books, and so did Mike, Comic Cryptic Castle Hills. I've always found those videos very interesting, and I'm really into seeing how people started collecting and some of the books that they first got. I just love history, and I love to see how things came to be. So this is my video. This is going to be probably one of 3 videos I'm going to make over the next couple of months, maybe sooner, highlighting 1993, the first year, 1994, the second year, and 1996. I'm skipping 1995 because 1995 wasn't as active as the previous 2 years or the next year. So that's where I'm going to cut it off. But hope you enjoy this video, so let's have a look. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, I'm just going to do a little recap on some of. If you saw my other video, my philosophy video, I talked a lot about my origins on how I got into collecting comics. So I'm not going to talk in depth as much about some of the things I spoke about in that video. I'm just going to maybe do a slight recap. Towards the end of 1992, I started collecting Marvel Masterpieces cards. I thought they were by Joe Jusko. Thanks, Brian. I thought those were the greatest pieces of art I've ever seen. Now, I had a couple of books previously. I collected a little bit of Tales from the Crypt reprints. I bought my first comic book, which was that Batman 1989 comic that came out when the movie came out, but I didn't really start contemplating becoming a comic book collector until I got these cards. Now, I'll just show you a quick example before I move on. This is late 1992, and these cards were just awesome. I thought they were awesome. Yeah, some people may not think they are, but they're the reason why I started collecting. And also the X-Men animated series cartoon. Do you remember that? Came on, I think, in January 1993. So these cards and that cartoon really moved me toward collecting X-Men comics because those were my first love when I became a collector. But let me just show you a quick example. This is a Marvel Masterpiece. It's still... Oh, one last thing. This is from 1992. As you can see, it's pretty beat up. Maybe I should have it encapsulated. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, they're in the same sleeves from 1993. So when I look through this, it's not just looking at the great art of these cards or whatever, all the other cards that I have in this. It just brings me back to that year. I even put tape. Can't really see it, and I really can't maneuver this thing too well, but I put tape around here because I was too cheap to change this thing because this thing was opening up because it had too many cards in it. Its tape is all from 1992, 1993. I just love looking at this stuff, knowing that these things came from that time. It brings me back to when I first started collecting and the long road ahead I had in comic collecting and in other things. But here we go. There's Mr. Sinister. I love Mr. Sinister. I thought this was one of the best looking pieces of art of Mr. Sinister. On the back of the card, it gives you his little bio. Back then, we didn't know his name was Nathaniel Essex. This was about, I think, 4 years before his origin came out, I think. But here it says, real name unrevealed, and his first appearance, Uncanny X-Men 221. Now, some of these cards, I think, messed up the first appearance, or the first cover appearance, which is this comic right here, X-Men 243. So when I was looking at this, I didn't see the small print. that this is actually first cover appearance, but I thought this was his first appearance, the book that he made his first appearance in. So when I decided to become a comic book collector, I got my X-Men 141 and 142. Those were my first X-Men books. As if you saw the comic philosophy video, I showed those off, and I told you that. When I started to collect, I wanted to collect first appearances, and I thought that those first appearances were the covers that were on the back of those cards, which a majority were. So, I got the X-Men 141 and 142 from St. Mark's Comics. I started collecting Wizard Magazine, and I saw advertisements in Wizard Magazine for cons and shows, and I started reading, the first appearances, and you see the story arcs and origins on the back, and all the great books that were coming out at that time. So I started to call comic shops. Now, I didn't have a comic shop in my town. It was mainly a card shop. He would have mainly baseball cards. It was by a veteran who obviously retired, and he opened up a card shop. That was something that he was interested in, but he would get a small stack of new books that came out. So that's how I would get some comics. He didn't have any wall books. I had to go to Woodbridge Center Mall to get, somewhat cool books, but they didn't have too many wall books either. It was Heroes World. Those of you that were from Central Jersey, places like Carteret, Perth Amboy, Woodbridge, you might remember Heroes World, top level of Woodbridge Mall. So those are the two places I went to, but they didn't really have anything. They didn't really have anything, so I had to call out. That's how I called St. Mark's Comics. But my uncle, now we're getting to where I got my first batch of comics. Okay, we know we had the X-Men 141, 142. This is now March to April 1993. Okay, I was really into the X-Men cartoon. I was constantly collecting new comic cards, and I would do so for the next 2 years. The X-Men Series 2 cards just came out. I didn't really like them that much. I thought the first series by Jim Lee was way better. But my uncle lived in Jersey City. We were originally from Jersey City, and he would go to there was the Hudson Mall that had a comics book store. I forget the name of it, but they had wall books. They had really cool books, as I found out. I don't really remember how, but I would call them, and I started talking to the guy on the phone. I was 14 at the time. This guy was 27. He later told me. His name was Gilbert, and we would talk about the X-Men, all that stuff. He was a big X-Men fan. Storm was his favorite character, as I would find out later. I'll tell you that story in a moment. But I started telling him the books that I wanted and so forth. So he would start going in the bins and start picking them out. I said, "Oh, do you have, X Factor number 5, first appearance of Apocalypse?" He said, yeah, I got that. But you probably would want that and number 6. I said, "Why would I want number 6? He says, "That's the one where his first cover appearance on the back of that Marvel Masterpiece card, but that's his full appearance." And that's how I first found out about full appearances. Gilbert sort of was like a mentor to me. He started to talk to me about, the differences between cameo appearances and full appearances and story arcs and origin stories, because I was all new to this stuff and I was really interested in it. I really wanted to get into it. I would ask him, I saw this X-Men cartoon. I saw Days of Futures Past, but there's this other story. There was this other cartoon show. Was that in the comics, or was this in the comics? He would say, no, that was for the show, or no, this was based on a couple of comics. He said, tell you what, he picked out a batch of books for me, but he said, here, if you're really into X-Men and you like the Sentinels, as I told him, because they were on the show, he says, let me get you these. And part of the first batch were these two things. Now the sleeves are gone. I didn't take very good care of these, but these are the Marvel Masterworks. It would be a collection of different stories, about 10 books or whatever. The two that he gave me that he thought that I would really enjoy, this one's the two X-Men, reprinting of X-Men numbers 11 to 21. Here it's the first appearance of the Juggernaut, the Stranger, the Sentinels, and so forth. So he says, yeah, if you like the Juggernaut, you like the Sentinels, you probably want to read these. So he gave me this. And he gave me here, if you want to get into the new X-Men, when they became really popular, you could start with the Phoenix. Starting with 101. And he also gave me, part of that first batch of books that he pulled out were a lot of classic X-Men. Those reprints from the mid-'80s, early '80s, that reprinted the Chris Claremont run, the early Chris Claremont run. So he gave me a bunch of those. But I'll show off some of the books that he picked out for me for that first batch of books. I got a lot. And in the last video I showed you, oh wait, well, I'll just show you a few of them. I thought I picked out a lot. All right, let me put these back. Here. Now, I was interested in the first appearance of Rogue because she was on the X-Men cartoon show. And he says, oh yeah, she showed up in Avengers. And I was like, really? Oh, okay. So, he picked out this. This was like a few bucks. Now, I remember this is back in 1993. And I said, I wanted that Mr. Sinister, this one. This came from 1993. I was like, oh yeah, but he said, that's not his first appearance. That's not 221. He says, here, let me give you this one. And I got this one. And these were all cheap. Now, I got plenty of books from him, including those 2 hardcover Marvel Masterworks. But the one book that I remember being the most expensive that I wanted, because he was on the X-Men cartoon show. Sorry for the glare. X-Men 266, first appearance of Gambit. This was $28. I think it's probably an 8.0, but you know, at that time I didn't know too much about grading. I didn't learn about grading until 2 months later with the next batch of books I'm going to show you. So that was, you know, that's how I really started to learn about comics, other than looking in the Wizard magazine and finding out about the covers from the Marvel Masterpieces cards and so forth. That's when I started to really have a great appreciation for comic books. You know, I know we look at today, we look at, oh wow, this is a wall book now. But I didn't look at it back then as a wall book. I looked at it as like, oh, this is the first appearance of Gambit. I'd like to see how he was introduced to the X-Men. I liked Gambit, you know. And there were so many other books. Like I got into that summer, the big event in Spider-Man. I started to go from X-Men to Spider-Man over the summer, was the Maximum Carnage storyline. I followed those books religiously. I was constantly buying the Maximum Carnage storyline. They showed up in Amazing Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Spider-Man Unlimited. And I was talking to Gilbert about that. I was like, oh man, this is so cool. I said, oh, I can't wait to see Carnage get killed at the end. And that 361 was part of the first batch that Gilbert gave me. It was like $4 or whatever that I showed in the previous video. But I said, oh, I can't wait till Carnage, you know, he gets killed at the end. He says, he's not going to get killed at the end. I said, why not? He says, Carnage is a big moneymaker for Marvel. They're not going to kill him off just the way they're not going to kill Venom off. And lo and behold, spoiler alert, at the end of Maximum Carnage, Carnage wasn't killed. But I finally, another episode of the, you know, Gilbert and all that stuff. Like I said, my uncle would go, you know, he would come over once a week for many, many years because, you know, my grandmother, his mother, my mother's mother too, she lived with us until she passed away in 1990. But for many years, he lived on his own, but he would come over once a week to see his mother. But also, my grandmother would have my uncle bring bags of his laundry over to our house, and she would have my mother clean his laundry, because he couldn't clean his own laundry. Not only that, she would also order, if you know, obviously you don't, but if anybody knew my grandmother, she didn't ask you to do things. She ordered you to do things. She ordered my mother to make him 4 days worth of meals. So when he would go back to Jersey City, he would eat for at least 4 days, and he would have to, I guess, buy fast food for the other days. So even after my grandmother passed away in 1990, my uncle still thought my mother would do his laundry and cook him food, so he was still coming over once a week, and he would give us an allowance, which my grandmother ordered him to do. And that's how I was able to have some money to buy comic books as I later went to cons and went to the store. And in addition, again, some money from my mother, of course, because I was 14. I didn't work or anything like that. Not yet, at least. But that's how I was able to get some books and save up for some books and save up for these batches. Gilbert helped me out many times throughout 1993. That was the first batch, and he would come up with some more books for me and so forth and so on. So my uncle would go to the store and bring them to the house. That's how I would get them. But one day, and one of many, I went to the Hudson Mall, and I finally went to the store, and I thought the store was awesome. It was great. And I said to Gilbert a couple of days earlier, yeah, this Saturday I'm coming down and I'll pick up some books. He's like, okay, great. I'm working. I'll see you. Funny story. I just have to tell it. So anyway, I get to the store and it's like, oh, Gilbert. And he's like, yeah, I'm Gilbert. He's like, oh yeah, hi, I'm Anthony. I'm the guy that you've been putting books aside for me. He's like, you're Anthony? I said, yeah. He's like, oh wow, and he's saying it with a smile on his face. He didn't make me feel uncomfortable or anything. He said, wow, you're not what I thought you would look like. And I was like, okay. I was saying that in my head. I said, well, what do you mean? I said it with a smile on my face. He said, I thought you were African American. I said, yeah. I said, well, why? I don't know if that was what I said in verbatim. But my uncle was walking, behind me at the time when Gilbert said that, and his eyes looked over at him. And I said, oh, okay. Yes, I can understand now. But yeah, quite a few people in my family have a very dark complexion. My uncle and my grandfather being one of them, and something that I used to people would ask me many times, especially the neighborhood kids, because like I said, my uncle would come over once a week, and some of the neighborhood kids, in particular, some of the ones I really didn't like, would look at him and then look at me and say some pretty nasty things. But I just thought that was a funny story with Gilbert. He says, yeah, I thought you were African. He might have said black. Gilbert was black, so he thought I was black, seeing my uncle come in and so forth. So I just thought that was funny. But then he showed me around. He says, like, oh, yeah. But he continued to sort of mentor me with books. I remember seeing an Amazing Spider-Man #9 on the wall. That's when I first really fell in love with that book. Remember the Marvel Masterpieces card had Electro's first appearance on the back, but I saw that book. I was like, oh, I want that. He says, oh, you're not spending that money on that book. I think the book was like $200. He says, you're not spending $200 on that. He said, it's not for you right now. I was like, oh, okay. You listen to the Jedi Master, and I'm just a Padawan, so I guess. But he picked out some more great books. I think I was missing at the time Amazing Spider-Man 363. With that first batch, like I said earlier, he got me the 361 and the 362, but he didn't have the 363 at the time. When I came to visit the store, he had it, so I got that. So I was like, oh, I got my Carnage trilogy complete. So that was really cool. And it was really great at that time. It was nice to have somebody that was helping me out, and he was a really nice guy, and he really did a lot for me when it came to starting my collection. He just not only helped me with getting some of the books I wanted, he increased my love for reading the books and appreciating them, not just because they're first appearances or because there are any value in them, just getting into the heart of why we read these things, because we enjoy the stories, we enjoy the art, and Gilbert was definitely one of those guys that helped cement that into me. I had it, but he just helped cemented it into me. So I thought that was really cool. One of my great memories. And I would go by on occasion whenever I could see him and so forth, and he would still get books for me. And I remember as we were approaching the summer, I'll get to some more books in a moment, we're approaching the summer of 1993, the big anniversary of X-Men, 30 years. And I don't know where I read it. Maybe it was the Wizard magazine or so forth. I don't remember. I said, oh, I heard that one of the X-Men was going to turn bad. And I said, I was talking about that with Gilbert, and I made the mistake of saying Storm. And he said, oh, don't say that. I'll slap your face if you say that again. I said, well, it's not going to be Storm. He said, no. It's going to be Colossus. I said, really? How? How do you know? He said Scott Lobdell comes into the store on occasion, and I would talk with him. And he said that Colossus, he's going to turn Colossus into a villain for that big, it's going to happen in X-Men 304. It's going to be things that lead to it, but it's going to be in X-Men 304 where he's going to be revealed as he's a villain. I said, how do you know? He says, he told me. He said, told me it's going to start with his sister Magic dying, and that's going to be one of the catalysts that makes him go over the edge, and he's going to turn into a bad guy. I was like, yeah, well, X-Men 303, Uncanny X-Men 303, Magic died. Uncanny X-Men 304, the big anniversary issue, Colossus joined the Acolytes. So I thought that was pretty cool. And one of the other things that Gilbert told me was, I said, oh yeah, because I was talking about Chris Claremont, he said, because I liked a lot of the earlier ones as I was reading from the reprints that he would get me from Classic X-Men and the Marvel Masterworks. I said, oh yeah, it's cool that you met Scott Lobdell. It's like, oh, it'd be cool if you can meet Chris Claremont. He said, he's an asshole. Getting toward the end of 1993, but before that, that year, I also got my first batch of Silver Age X-Men. I was a big X-Men, as you know, and I ordered them from a company called 1 Million Comics that would advertise in the comic books that I was reading. And I put it in order, which took like 2 months to get, or a month and a half, or it seemed longer. And I said, oh, I want to get some of those early X-Men Silver Ages. And here is the first batch of X-Men Silver Ages I got. Some of them I've upgraded, and I'll tell you which ones I've upgraded. But here we go. Starting with X-Men number 3. This was my first Silver Age X-Men book, which I got, I think, in June of 1993 from 1 Million Comics. I think the order was placed in April. Why it took 2 months, or I think it took about 2 months, I couldn't tell you. The next one, now I've upgraded this book, but I also have the original, and the original was in this bad shape. 14, because remember I said I like the Sentinels? Look at that. Horrible shape, but it was the best I could afford. 14. This one's upgraded. I don't have the original anymore. I gave it away. I think I recently upgraded this one like last year. After 20 some odd years of having that shitty Pence copy. Nothing's wrong with Pence, but someone started to color in the X and there was extra staples on it, so I was like, ugh. This one was upgraded. I no longer have the original. X-Men 54, first Alex Summers. Now, I've upgraded this one, but this is the original too. X-Men 58. A couple years ago, I'm reading through this, and I just realized that there's like a page missing. They sent this. Back then, you would just say you wanted this in this shape or whatever. Never came and told me that this had a page missing. I hated 1 Million Comics. For anybody that dealt with them, it was like, ugh. But I was first-time collector. I didn't know. And I've upgraded this one too. I have a couple copies of this, but this was the original one I got back in June of 1993. First appearance of Sauron. I was collecting the X-Men action figures too, and that year, a few months earlier, the Sauron figure came out, so I gotta get that one. And I did. So as 1993, the fall came, I became a sophomore in high school, and I still collected X-Men. There was still plenty of X-Men books I was going to get, and I would get in 1994. But I started moving towards Spider-Man because of that Maximum Carnage storyline. It really got me into a big Spider-Man fan. So I went to cons, and I was able to get a couple of old Spider-Man books. I'm just going to show a couple of them. This one was one of the first. The second appearance of Scorpion. I still need to upgrade this one. This is still the original one I got back, I think, in September of or August of 1993, and another one from the con. First appearance of the Rhino. And so let's get to some 1 Million Comics orders that came. I think I ordered in July. That came in September, or maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe I ordered them in August. I don't know. This is an upgrade. This is not the actual one from 1993. The one from 1993 was in shit shape, but I upgraded this a couple years ago. 42, the first full appearance of Mary Jane, which I was super happy to get. And the best one of the bunch, this was, I think, $30 at that time. It's probably in 5.5 or a 6. Death of the Green Goblin. So those were some of the things. Those are some of the memories I have from when I first started collecting, and some of the first books I got. Christmas came around, and my dad was going to get me something, but he didn't get me anything on Christmas. My mother got me the Sega CD, which you can see some of the Sega CD games. And let me reach over here from one of the games from 1993. Since I was really into Spider-Man, like I said, toward the end of 1993, I made sure I asked for Amazing Spider-Man versus the Kingpin for Sega CD. This is sort of like a redo of this game, but this is way better. Way better. Play controls better. It gives you the ability to go and select the stages at your leisure instead of, you know, having to do the stages in this order. Music, obviously, because now it's CD quality. It's much better. I love this game. If anything, that game continued to make me a Spider-Man fan. And now this was Christmas. I got this. I noticed that there was. I knew. You know, I was reading Maximum Carnage, and I knew about Venom and all that stuff. And Venom made his appearance in this game too. And I was like, oh man, I really wish I could get Venom. So on Thursday, I remember the day, December 30th, 1993, went to a convention off of Route 9. There was this hotel called the Budget Motor Lounge, which is right next to the Forge. I know for those of you who are all different parts of the world and the country, you're like, well, what? But this is mainly for people like Semper Fi guy that, you know, grew up in the area, and others that might, hey, yeah, I remember that. They had a convention late night. It was like 7 to 9. It was very odd. But anyway, we went, and I hardly had any money. So I bought two recent releases, which was Venom, Enemy Within #1, and Spider-Man Unlimited #4. I couldn't afford anything else. So my dad says, well, what do you want? I said, I want that comic up there. I was pointing to a specific comic, and it was $45. And he said, well, he says, do you have the money for it? I said, no. He said, gave me one of those. I was like, well, I guess you can't get it. And I was like, ugh. He would do that. I was like, all right, can we go now? Because I really, you know, there's nothing else I want. He says, all right, let's go. And me and my mother started walking out. My father was a little behind. And we were walking out to the car. My father still wasn't there with us. And then maybe my mother says, oh, where the hell is he? He came out like maybe a minute or two later. And he said, what was that book you wanted again? I said what the book was. And he said, oh, this one? I said, oh. He's like, yeah, here. Of course, he did one of, let me see. This is in bad shape. This one. He did one of these with it. He says, oh, here you go. I was like, oh, shit. And that's the reason why it has like this little non-color breaking crease. I should have it pressed out. But that's where that came from, the origin of that crease. But yeah, 1993 closed with the first full appearance of Venom. So it was one hell of a first year of collecting books. There were so many other books I got. But books like Spider-Man Unlimited #1, which started the Maximum Carnage storyline, and reading those classic X-Men reprints. You know, yes, we all aim to get wall books and books like this, but really those type of books, you know, the long story arcs and the reading the reprints and stuff like this, these sort of things are the backbone for anybody that becomes a lover of collecting comics and really appreciating the stories, the characters, the art. Those serve as the backbone. Yes, we all want these type of books, and we all hope to get bigger books. But remember, though, it's the stories and the characters that we read, and books that are not necessarily valuable, that really serve as the backbone to a lot of our collections. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd like to do my comic history part 2, 1994, pretty soon. So if you're the first time watching this video, I know this was kind of long. It's almost a half hour. This is the type of video that, you know, you probably put on in the background, because I showed some books, but it's not really a haul video. This is the type of video you put on when you're, I don't know, cleaning your room or whatever, or cleaning the house, and you hear it in the background. But for those that stuck with me throughout this entire video, thank you. If you liked the video, first time watcher, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. I enjoy talking with everybody. And hopefully my next haul will be out within a couple of weeks, maybe sooner. Who knows? I'll be watching your videos. Those of you that are interested in making videos showing off your collection, please do so. We'll all be watching. Take care, everyone.